The stars outside the small observation window shone cold and distant, a silent reminder of how far they had traveled. For years, the Arkeli had drifted through space, searching for a place to call home, and every world had turned them away. Every government, every colony, every civilization that could have offered them shelter had looked at them with suspicion or fear. And now they floated in the void, fragile ships creaking under the strain of centuries-old engines, their hopes slipping like stardust through their fingers. The Arkeli were unlike humans, yet in many ways they were familiar. Their eyes were wide and reflective, catching every flicker of light. Their skin shimmered faintly like the surface of the sea at dawn. But beyond the differences, their expressions carried the same pain, the same exhaustion, the same quiet despair that any sentient being would feel when it had nowhere to go. They had lost everything. Their planet had been consumed by a plague that had spread faster than anyone could control. What survived of their kind had been scattered, hunted, and rejected. The leader of the convoy, a tall, slender figure with silver-blue markings running along their arms, paced the command deck. Every step was careful, measured, but there was an unshakable tension in their shoulders. They had sent countless messages, begging, pleading, even offering what little resources they had left, but each transmission had returned with the same cold response. Denied. No capacity. Return home. Home was no longer a place. Home was a memory, a fleeting vision of what could have been, now swallowed by space. In the observation bay, a group of young Arkeli sat huddled together, whispering quietly. Their voices carried the soft music of a language that had survived thousands of years, now tinged with sadness. Some of them were not even old enough to remember their original planet. They had grown up among the stars, learning that the universe was not always kind. They clutched at each other as if holding on could somehow keep the past alive. One of the children pressed their face against the glass, staring at the stars as though they might recognize one of them, a beacon that could guide them somewhere safe. Even among the adults, the fear was palpable. Food supplies were low. Oxygen levels were barely holding. The youngest ships were starting to show the first signs of engine fatigue. If they could not find a world willing to take them, their existence might end before it had a chance to begin anew. Yet still, the leader did not give up. Every day they drafted messages, each one more desperate than the last, until finally, they had an idea that seemed both impossible and necessary. Earth. The blue planet had been one of the last civilizations they had avoided. It was distant, surrounded by legends of its own struggles and chaos. Many had said it was not a place of kindness, but the Arkeli knew that humans had a reputation for resilience, for stubborn compassion. They had survived wars, famine, and disease that had wiped out lesser civilizations. Perhaps Earth could be different. Perhaps humanity could see them not as a threat but as beings in need of mercy. The transmission was simple, yet heavy with all the weight of their desperation. We ask not for a home, only for a chance to live. If you have no place for us, we will continue into the void. But if there is even a small space for mercy, please let us find it with you. Sending the message took all of their remaining energy. The ship's systems groaned as it transmitted across light years, a faint pulse that carried hope further than the Arkeli had allowed themselves to feel in decades. The leader held their hands over the console, as if pressing their palms could somehow push their words into reality. Around them, crew members whispered prayers in their native language, gestures of hope that could not be measured in any system. Days passed. The silence from Earth was almost worse than rejection. The convoy drifted in orbit around a lifeless moon, engines idling to conserve fuel, hearts idling to conserve hope. Children grew restless, adults grew anxious, and even the leader felt the gnawing of doubt. What if this was another refusal? What if Earth, like every other world, turned them away? Then finally a signal. It was faint, fragmented, almost like a whisper across the void. The Arkeli scrambled to decode it, hands shaking, eyes wide. As the message became clear, disbelief painted every face aboard the ships. Earth had responded, not with rejection, not with hesitation, but with a simple phrase that carried more weight than any fleet of ships. We will consider your request. It was not a promise of safety, but it was enough. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, the Arkeli allowed themselves to breathe. There were tears, silent, glimmering streams that reflected the soft light of the distant stars. Adults held children tightly, whispering reassurances they did not entirely believe. The leader allowed a small, almost imperceptible smile to cross their face. Perhaps the nightmare of endless rejection was over. Perhaps humanity could see them as something other than a burden. In the quiet moments that followed, the crew began to share stories of what they had lost. Memories of green skies and crystal rivers, songs that had been sung for generations, names of places and people now gone forever. It was painful, yes, but it was also a reminder of why they had survived. Their species had endured death and betrayal, and yet here they were, floating among the stars, still seeking life. And Earth, though distant and unknown, had opened a door. It was a door that had been slammed shut by countless others. It was a door that offered only a chance, not safety. But it was a chance. A fragile, precious hope that something beyond despair might exist. The Arkeli knew that the path ahead would not be easy. Even if Earth allowed them to land, there would be challenges. Humans would be cautious, fearful. The Arkeli would have to prove that they were not a threat, that they had the right to exist alongside a species that had survived as long as humanity had. But for now, in the small observation bay, with the stars shining cold and indifferent beyond the glass, the Arkeli allowed themselves to hope. They were not alone. They had not been abandoned entirely. And perhaps, just perhaps, Earth could become more than a world of strangers. Perhaps it could become a place they could call home. In the following days, the crew worked tirelessly. They repaired engines, rationed supplies, and prepared for what would come next. Every gesture, every small action, carried the weight of generations. Even the youngest members of the convoy, who had never known another home, learned what it meant to persevere. The leader often stood quietly, watching the preparations, reflecting on the journey that had brought them here. Each moment was a reminder of the fragility of life and the strength of hope. And somewhere, far below the stars, Earth turned slowly on its axis, unaware of the small fleet approaching. But soon the humans would see them. Soon the conversation would begin, and in that moment, the Arkeli would learn whether compassion could exist across the void, whether a species that had survived rejection after rejection could finally find the mercy it had long been denied. For the first time in decades, the Arkeli did not feel like exiles. They felt like travelers on the edge of a new beginning, a new chapter in the story of their people. The journey had been long, the stars cold and distant, and the universe had been cruel. But perhaps for the first time it could be kind. The Earth that the Arkeli were approaching was not silent. Far from it, beneath the thin blue clouds and spinning oceans, humans were awake, watching and debating. When the first faint signals of the Arkeli transmission reached the planet, it spread quickly through every network. Millions of people paused their lives to listen, to wonder, to decide what this meant. Governments held emergency meetings. Scientists worked frantically to understand what they were seeing, and ordinary people shared their hopes and fears in quiet, heartfelt conversations across the globe. On the largest council of human leaders, located in a city that had grown from the ashes of countless conflicts, the debate was intense. The representatives argued not as diplomats or politicians, but as humans grappling with morality and survival. Some argued that the Arkeli could bring danger, that their disease or unknown biology could threaten life on Earth. Others reminded them that humans themselves had survived countless hardships because someone had dared to help, because someone had chosen compassion over fear. A quiet voice rose in the middle of the council. It belonged to a scientist who had spent her life studying life beyond Earth. She had lost her family years ago in a mining accident on another planet. Her eyes were tired, but her voice was steady. "We know what they are asking. They are not demanding. They are asking for a chance, a single chance to live. We have survived war, famine, and disaster because we chose hope over fear. What will it say about us if we turn them away?" There was silence after her words. Even the skeptics could not ignore the truth in them. The Arkeli were not asking for conquest or wealth or dominance. They were asking for mercy, for a chance to survive. And humans, of all beings in the galaxy, understood the weight of survival. Meanwhile, the Arkeli fleet continued its slow drift toward Earth. Every ship carried the same mixture of hope and fear. The young ones pressed their faces against the windows, staring at the faint blue glow of the planet below. Some whispered names of people and places they had never seen, imagining that they could be real. Others held the hands of their parents or friends, feeling the trembling pulse of a species that had almost been erased. The leaders of the Arkeli knew that nothing on Earth was guaranteed. Every moment of hope was accompanied by the risk of rejection. They had seen it too many times in the past. Worlds had closed their doors, whispered excuses, and sent them away with polite cruelty. And yet this time felt different. Something about Earth, about the humans themselves, gave them a glimmer of possibility. Back on Earth, media outlets broadcast images of the incoming fleet. Citizens watched the ghostly ships hover above the atmosphere, lights flickering like fireflies in the vast darkness. The public was divided. Some feared the unknown, worried about contamination or conflict. Others rallied in support, holding signs, chanting words of welcome, and sharing messages of encouragement online. Humanity was, in that moment, united by a single question. Could they be better than fear? Could they do what every other world had failed to do? In the council chamber, debates continued late into the night. Some humans spoke of strategy and safety. They spoke of quarantines, containment, and precautionary measures. Others spoke simply and plainly. These are lives, they said. We have space. We have resources. And we have a choice. Do we do what is easy or do we do what is right? Eventually, the council reached a decision. Not easily, not without worry, but with a measure of courage that had defined humanity for centuries. They would allow the Arkeli to approach, to dock, to find shelter and care. There would be rules, yes, quarantines, medical checks, and careful oversight. But they would not turn away life simply because it was different. When the message finally reached the Arkeli, the relief was palpable. In every ship, beings who had spent decades in fear finally allowed themselves to smile. Some cried silently, others hugged friends and family, and some simply sat in quiet awe, staring at the blue planet that might finally be their home. The leader of the convoy allowed themselves a moment of private gratitude, staring out at Earth and whispering words in the language of their ancestors, words that meant "thank you for seeing us." Preparations began immediately. The Arkeli worked alongside Earth's experts, learning the protocols, adjusting their systems, and preparing to step onto a planet they had only imagined in dreams. Every gesture was cautious but filled with hope. Children learned to understand human communication. Adults studied customs and regulations, and elders shared their knowledge of survival in ways that impressed even the most seasoned Earth scientists. There was fear, yes. Fear of misunderstanding, fear of prejudice, fear of accidents. But there was also awe. Humans had never seen beings so different and yet so alive, so full of stories and history. The Arkeli shared their music, their art, their memories of a planet lost to disease but not forgotten. Humans, in turn, offered food, shelter, and kindness, the small gestures of a species that knew the power of compassion. Outside the council chambers, the world watched. Social media buzzed with anticipation. Children drew pictures of what they imagined the Arkeli looked like. Teachers spoke of empathy and courage in classrooms. Ordinary citizens debated not whether they should help, but how they could be part of a historic moment. Even those who feared the unknown felt a spark of pride that humanity could stand for mercy, even when the cost was uncertain. The journey from orbit to the surface of Earth was not simple. The Arkeli ships were old, delicate, and not designed for planetary entry. Earth's engineers worked tirelessly to create safe corridors, using drones and shuttlecraft to guide the fleet down slowly and steadily. Every landing was a small victory, a confirmation that hope was stronger than despair. For the Arkeli, stepping onto Earth for the first time was overwhelming. The air smelled strange, the ground felt unfamiliar, and the sky seemed brighter than any they had seen in years. Children laughed in wonder, elders knelt to touch the soil, and even those who had spent their lives in space felt a rush of belonging. They were alive. They were safe, at least for now, and they had been seen finally as beings deserving of compassion. The leader of the convoy walked slowly among the newcomers, observing their reactions, listening to their whispers of awe and relief. Every step they took was a reminder that survival was not only about living, but about being recognized, about being acknowledged as a species that had a right to exist. They understood that Earth's acceptance was not unconditional. There would be challenges, adjustments, and scrutiny. But for the first time in generations, they could breathe without fear. In the quiet moments between landings and preparations, humans and Arkeli began to communicate more deeply. Children from both species played together, Discovering similarities in laughter and curiosity, scientists exchanged knowledge, finding unexpected parallels in biology and chemistry. Artists shared techniques and musicians experimented with new instruments and sounds. There was a sense of wonder, a feeling that despite the darkness they had both endured, there could be light and even joy. As the first night fell on Earth, the Arkeli looked up at the stars from a planet that could finally be their home. They knew that not all challenges were behind them. There would be prejudice, fear, and misunderstanding. But they also knew that humanity had made a choice to stand with them, to offer mercy when so many others had refused. That choice, they realized, was the most powerful force in the universe. And so, in those early hours, the Arkeli allowed themselves to hope. The journey had been long, filled with rejection and despair. But Earth had opened its doors, and in that act of courage they found the possibility of a future. They had survived the void, survived the judgment of countless worlds, and now finally they could begin again. The children slept in makeshift shelters, dreaming of forests and rivers they had never seen. Adults tended to repairs, exchanged stories, and planned for the days ahead. And the leaders of the Arkeli fleet stood together, looking at the humans who had greeted them with cautious kindness, and felt a quiet, growing trust. Perhaps this planet could be different. Perhaps humanity could be the species that finally understood what it meant to survive not only through strength, but through empathy. In the days that followed, Earth became a place of learning for both species. The Arkeli adapted to gravity and atmosphere, while humans learned about alien culture and resilience. Relationships formed slowly, cautiously, but each interaction built trust. Children of both species laughed together, sharing games and stories. Scientists collaborated, artists inspired each other, and communities slowly integrated. The Arkeli had not only found refuge, they had found a chance to belong. For the leader of the convoy, the weight of responsibility remained. They knew that the future was uncertain. They knew that prejudice, fear, and unforeseen events could still threaten their people. But as they watched humans and Arkeli working side by side, sharing laughter and knowledge, they realized that sometimes the greatest victories were not battles, but the quiet acts of mercy and courage that allowed life to continue. And in that realization, hope bloomed, fragile but persistent, like the first flowers of spring after a long, harsh winter. Earth had said yes when every world had said no. Earth had offered life when others had turned away. And for the first weeks on Earth were filled with cautious excitement. The Arkeli were learning how to live on a planet they had only imagined. The air smelled strange but clean. The gravity felt heavy at first but familiar over time, and the sun warmed them in ways they had forgotten. Every step they took was careful but full of awe. Humans walked among them, guiding them, explaining customs, and listening to stories of distant stars and lost worlds. On the surface, life seemed almost normal. Children of both species learned to run together, to play together, to discover the simple joys that had been missing for decades. There were games of balance, races across open fields, and quiet moments of drawing and singing. Adults worked together on repairs, creating shelters, and sharing knowledge. The Arkeli were patient learners, absorbing everything about human ways, while humans themselves were curious and often amazed by the abilities and knowledge the newcomers carried. But life on Earth was not without tension. Some humans still feared the unknown. In cities and towns far from the landing zones, whispers of concern spread. What if they bring sickness?
What if they change our way of life?
These fears were natural, even understandable, but they reminded everyone that acceptance was only the first step. Trust had to be built slowly, one interaction at a time. The leader of the Arkeli spent long hours walking among both species, observing, listening, and learning. They knew that the future depended not only on survival, but on harmony. Every misunderstanding could become a problem. Every fear could grow if ignored. Yet every day also brought small victories. Smiles shared between human children and alien children, laughter echoing in fields that had once been empty, and stories exchanged under the soft glow of Earth's sunsets. In the center of the settlement, humans had created a council for integration. Scientists, teachers, engineers, and volunteers from both species worked together. The Arkeli shared knowledge of technology that could clean water faster and create energy more efficiently, while humans taught them about agriculture, medicine, and daily life on a planet that moved differently than the void of space. The learning was mutual. Humans learned patience and resilience from the Arkeli, while the Arkeli discovered the unpredictability and creativity that humans carried in every gesture. Despite the progress, there were moments of tension. One day, a small group of humans protested at the edge of the settlement. They carried signs, shouted questions, and demanded to know why Earth had accepted beings that were not of this world. Some were loud, others quiet but firm. The council met immediately, trying to address their concerns without creating fear or hostility. The leader of the Arkeli stood silently nearby, understanding the human fears even as they felt their own people's anxiety rise. Inside the council chambers, humans debated quietly. Some spoke of compromise and protection. Others spoke of hope and morality. The scientist who had first spoken in favor of mercy raised her voice gently but firmly. "We have the chance to show who we truly are," she said. "Not just as a species but as individuals. Fear will always exist, but courage is choosing to act anyway. These beings are alive and we have chosen to see them. That choice is the foundation of trust, and trust is stronger than fear." Her words resonated beyond the chamber. Outside, children watched quietly, learning lessons they would carry forever. Adults who had protested began to see the Arkeli not as strangers but as neighbors, fellow beings with stories, families, and hope. Slowly, tension began to ease. There was still caution, but it was tempered by curiosity and empathy. Meanwhile, the Arkeli continued their own journey of adaptation. Simple things taken for granted by humans were new and challenging for them. Gravity made their movements slower. Their food required adjustment to human-compatible nutrients, and even the concept of private property seemed foreign. Yet they learned quickly with patience and persistence. The younger generation adapted fastest, laughing at mistakes, celebrating small successes, and bringing joy to everyone around them. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the settlement, the leader of the Arkeli walked with a small group of children. They were showing the children how to use a simple machine that could filter water faster than the old systems. The human children were fascinated, asking questions, experimenting, and sometimes failing in ways that made everyone laugh. The Arkeli children tried to mimic their human friends, falling over and giggling as they learned. "It is strange," said one human child, "but I think I like it." The Arkeli leader smiled, a rare gesture in their species, but one that humans immediately recognized. "Strange can become familiar," they said softly, "and familiar can become home." That night, the adults of both species gathered to share stories. The humans spoke of their own past, of hardships survived and lessons learned. The Arkeli told stories of worlds lost, of stars that had been their homes, and of families that had endured separation. There was laughter and tears, silence and understanding. The night sky, clear and bright, became a bridge between worlds, a reminder that survival was only meaningful when shared. In the following weeks, small projects began to take shape. The Arkeli helped build gardens that could feed both species, using techniques that humans had never imagined. They designed shelters that could withstand storms and provide comfort in ways humans appreciated. Together, humans and Arkeli experimented with music, creating melodies that blended voices from two very different worlds. It was not always perfect, but it was beautiful, a sign that life could be rebuilt even after immense loss. Yet beneath the surface, there were whispers of concern. Some humans worried about what other worlds might think. Some wondered if the Arkeli's presence would attract attention from factions beyond the solar system. The council took these concerns seriously, balancing security with openness, ensuring that fear did not undo the fragile trust that had been built. For the Arkeli, every day was a test of patience and resilience. They remembered what it felt like to be rejected, to be unwanted, and they were determined not to let fear or misunderstanding ruin this second chance. They worked tirelessly, sometimes through exhaustion, always with the knowledge that their survival depended not only on the technology of Earth, but on the empathy of humans. The leader often walked among both species, quietly observing interactions, listening to conversations, and offering guidance when needed. They understood that trust was fragile, and that even small gestures could have enormous impact. A shared meal, a gentle smile, a moment of teaching. These were as important as any technology or system. The future would be built on these small moments, moments that reminded everyone that life was precious, fragile, and worth protecting. One day, a young human approached the Arkeli leader. They held a small object, a simple toy that had been made from scraps, and offered it with a shy smile. The Arkeli child beside them looked surprised, then smiled, understanding the gesture. The leader of the Arkeli watched silently, heart swelling with a mixture of gratitude and awe. Even the smallest acts could bridge the largest divides. As months passed, life began to take on a rhythm. The Arkeli learned the sounds of Earth, the wind through trees, the waves on distant shores, the voices of humans in laughter and conversation. Humans learned the stories of the stars, the histories of a civilization that had endured more than most could imagine. Children grew stronger, adults grew wiser, and the settlement became a place not of fear, but of learning, growth, and shared hope. Through it all, the leader of the Arkeli reflected on the journey that had brought them here. They thought of the worlds that had turned them away, the long years of drifting in space, the fear and uncertainty that had defined so much of their existence. And they thought of Earth, of humans who had chosen to act with courage and compassion, who had looked past fear and seen life and recognized its value. It was a lesson they would never forget, that survival was not just about being strong or clever, but about connection, empathy, and the willingness to see beyond oneself. At night, when the stars shone overhead and the settlement was quiet, the Arkeli looked up and whispered stories to each other, remembering those lost, honoring the past, and dreaming of a future where their children could live without fear. And in those quiet moments, Earth felt like more than a planet. It felt like home. A home not given freely but earned through trust, courage, and the simple, powerful act of being seen. The Arkeli had been rejected by countless worlds. They had drifted through the cold void of space, uncertain if survival was even possible. Yet on Earth they found more than safety. They found understanding, community, and the chance to build life anew. And as they worked alongside humans, shared stories, and laughed with children, they realized that home was not just a place, it was a connection, a bridge between beings, a promise that even after darkness, hope could endure. And in the quiet of the night, the leader of the Arkeli gazed at the horizon, feeling the gentle warmth of Earth beneath their feet, listening to the soft voices of humans and children alike, and allowed themselves to believe that this time, the journey had finally reached a place worth calling home. Life on Earth for the Arkeli was not easy, even though they were no longer floating in the void. Days were filled with learning, adapting, and connecting with humans, but beneath the surface, challenges began to appear. Some humans were curious, even excited, but others whispered doubts. They wondered if the Arkeli might bring hidden danger, or if their presence would upset the balance of life on Earth. Fear had a way of growing quietly, spreading through conversations and news outlets faster than anyone could control. The Arkeli themselves felt it. They noticed the stares, the occasional whispered comments, the hesitation in handshakes or in the eyes of people passing by. It reminded them of the long years in space when doors had closed one after another. It reminded them of rejection, and yet they continued to persevere, showing patience, kindness, and willingness to learn, hoping that trust could grow, even in a world that had been cautious at first. One day, a group of scientists gathered in the central laboratory. The humans were curious about Arkeli biology, not to exploit or harm but to understand. They wanted to ensure that Earth and its inhabitants were safe, while also learning about a species that had survived against unimaginable odds. The Arkeli allowed it, working alongside the humans. They shared samples, explained their unique biology, and answered every question with patience. But then the scientists noticed something unusual. It was subtle at first. Tiny irregularities in certain biological markers, patterns that did not match Earth life or anything recorded in human databases. The Arkeli seemed healthy, yet there was something unusual in their DNA, a trace of something unknown. At first, the humans were cautious but curious. They began detailed studies carefully and respectfully. The Arkeli stood by, anxious but trusting. They had endured isolation and fear for so long, and they did not want to lose this fragile connection with Earth. The more the scientists studied, the more they realized that these anomalies were not dangerous in the usual sense. They were remnants of the plague that had destroyed the Arkeli homeworld, but they were also strangely dormant. The disease had not spread to humans, nor did it seem likely to. Yet the discovery raised a question that weighed heavily on everyone involved. Why had the plague been so devastating in the first place? How had it destroyed a civilization so completely? The answers came slowly, through careful research and collaboration. It turned out that the plague had not been a natural disease. It had been engineered by an interstellar alliance, a powerful group of worlds that had wanted to control or eliminate the Arkeli for their independence, creativity, and resources. The realization sent a chill through the human scientists. This was not a simple case of biology. It was politics, power, and cruelty at a scale that was almost unimaginable. When the leader of the Arkeli learned this, there was a mixture of sorrow, anger, and relief. Sorrow for the lost generations, anger at the injustice they had suffered, and relief that their survival was not due to a continuing threat, but the resilience of their species. They shared the news with their people quietly, acknowledging the pain but also emphasizing the importance of focusing on the future. Survival was not just about biology. It was about courage, cooperation, and hope. Humans responded with empathy. They realized that this was not just about science or protection, it was about solidarity. They had opened their world to a species that had been hunted, rejected, and nearly wiped out. And now they understood why that species had endured so much. They saw the strength, the patience, and the wisdom of the Arkeli, and they felt a quiet pride in being part of a story that was larger than themselves. Still, not everyone on Earth was comfortable with the truth. Rumors began to spread about the engineered plague, the interstellar alliance, and the possibility that other civilizations might interfere with Earth if they knew the Arkeli were here. Fear began to creep in again. Would Earth be safe? Could humans defend their choice to help? Could they protect the Arkeli from those who might see them as targets? In response, the council convened again. This time, the debate was different. It was no longer just about mercy or compassion. It was about responsibility. Humans realized that by helping the Arkeli, they had made a choice that could have consequences beyond their planet. They discussed measures to protect both species, ways to integrate the Arkeli safely, and plans to monitor the situation in case the Interstellar Alliance made a move. The discussions were long, careful, and sometimes tense, but everyone agreed on one principle. The Arkeli were not just refugees. They were beings with the right to live and be protected. Meanwhile, life among the Arkeli continued with small victories and challenges. Children laughed and played, discovering the joys of Earth. Adults worked on projects that combined Arkeli technology with human methods, creating innovative solutions for energy, agriculture, and communication. Even simple activities like preparing food or walking in forests became moments of discovery. The Arkeli were learning to live, not just survive, and humans were learning to see life through a wider lens full of diversity and wonder. But the underlying tension remained. There were whispers among the public about the unknown, debates about whether the Arkeli should be confined to certain zones, and questions about how much trust could be given. The leader of the Arkeli understood this tension. They had seen rejection many times before and knew that it could return if fear outweighed understanding. They worked tirelessly to engage with humans, building relationships, answering questions, and demonstrating that their presence was not a threat, but a gift of cooperation and friendship. One evening, the leader of the Arkeli gathered a small group of humans and Arkeli to walk in the nearby hills. The sun was setting, painting the sky with shades of orange and purple. They talked quietly about what had been lost, what had been learned, and what they hoped for the future. Humans shared stories of resilience and survival on Earth. The Arkeli spoke of their homeworld, of the culture, art, and science that had once flourished, and of the hope that now guided them. A child, human, asked, "Will other worlds try to hurt you?" The Arkeli leader looked at the child, their eyes reflecting the last light of the sun. "Perhaps," they said softly. "But we are not alone anymore. We have friends who will stand with us, who understand that life is precious and that compassion is stronger than fear." The words hung in the air like a promise. They were not certain, not a guarantee, but they were a commitment. Humans had chosen to act with courage, to see value in life that was not their own, and in doing so, they had created a bond that could not be easily broken. In the following weeks, the integration efforts deepened. Humans and Arkeli built schools together, teaching both species about each other's culture and knowledge. Communities were formed that mixed both species in work, recreation, and learning. Music, art, and storytelling became bridges that allowed people to connect beyond language and biology. The Arkeli showed humans new ways to create and think, while humans shared the wisdom of survival, strategy, and empathy. Together, they discovered that cooperation could produce something far greater than fear or isolation. Yet beneath these successes, vigilance remained. The Council implemented monitoring systems not as a punishment but as a safeguard. Both species understood that safety and freedom could coexist, and that trust required care and attention. The Arkeli learned the rhythm of human life, while humans learned the quiet, deliberate patience of a species that had endured centuries of rejection. Together, they created a delicate balance, one that required constant effort but promised remarkable growth. One night, as the stars began to emerge above the settlement, the Arkeli leader stood quietly, looking out at the Earth. They remembered the endless years in space, the cold silence of the void, the despair that had been their constant companion, and now they saw a world that had not rejected them, that had chosen courage over fear and compassion over indifference. They felt a sense of awe, gratitude, and cautious hope. The challenges were far from over. Fear could rise again, misunderstanding could threaten peace, and the interstellar alliance might one day come to test the bonds that had been formed. But for the first time in generations, the Arkeli felt that they were not alone. They were seen, valued, and part of a community that believed in life, in hope, and in the strength of compassion. As the night deepened, children of both species slept peacefully. Adults shared stories, and the leader of the Arkeli walked among them silently. Every gesture, every conversation, every act of trust was a reminder that survival was more than biology. It was connection. And in that connection, they discovered a force stronger than fear, stronger than rejection, stronger than despair, the courage to live, to hope, and to build a future together. Life on Earth had settled into a fragile rhythm. Humans and Arkeli lived and worked together, learning from each other, sharing laughter and knowledge, and building a sense of community. But the calm was only temporary. Far beyond the solar system, other worlds were watching. The interstellar alliance that had once destroyed the Arkeli homeworld had noticed their survival on Earth. They saw a species that had escaped their control, a fleet that had evaded destruction, and a planet that had chosen mercy over fear. To them, this was not a story of compassion, it was a challenge. Messages arrived at Earth, formal, cold, and demanding. The Alliance wanted the Arkeli returned immediately, no questions asked. They threatened isolation, economic embargoes, and even implied military action if Earth refused. The Council of Humans met in an emergency session, aware of the stakes. The room was tense. Leaders spoke in measured tones, weighing the threat against their values. The Arkeli waited quietly, understanding that their fate, and possibly Earth's, was being debated far more intensely than they had imagined. One human scientist, who had worked closely with the Arkeli from the beginning, stood and addressed the council. These beings are alive. They have been hunted, rejected, and nearly destroyed. If we hand them over, we become complicit in their suffering. If we refuse, we risk conflict. But we must ask ourselves, what kind of species do we want to be? Her words were simple but heavy with meaning. Everyone in the room understood that this decision was not just about survival. It was about identity. The Arkeli leader spoke, their voice steady, calm, yet carrying the weight of generations. We did not come to challenge your world. We came seeking life, mercy, and a chance to exist. We ask only that you stand with us as life, not as soldiers. We will do our part, but the choice is yours. The humans in the room felt the courage in those words, a quiet bravery that reminded them why they had chosen to help in the first place. Outside the council chambers, the world watched. Media channels buzzed with speculation. Citizens debated what should be done, balancing fear with hope. Communities rallied in support of the Arkeli, holding peaceful vigils and demonstrations. Signs read simple phrases: life deserves a chance, mercy is strength, and we stand together. The message was clear. Earth would not easily bow to threats when life was at stake. Even with public support, the tension was real. Humans began to prepare defenses quietly. Ships were positioned strategically in orbit. Drones patrolled skies, and communication networks were reinforced. The goal was not to provoke the alliance, but to show that Earth would protect those under its care. Every human involved understood the gravity of the situation. The choice to protect the Arkeli was moral, but it was also dangerous. Meanwhile, the Arkeli worked alongside humans to strengthen their defenses, not with weapons to attack, but systems to protect. to ensure that no harm could come to anyone. Their knowledge of energy shields, communications, and survival tactics proved invaluable. Together, humans and R. Kelly built a network of safety that was both practical and symbolic. Life was stronger when defended by those who valued it. In the quiet of one evening, the Arkeli leader walked with a human council member, overlooking a field where children of both species were playing. The sky was clear and the stars began to appear, distant but brilliant. "Do you think they will come?" the human asked softly. "They may," the Arkeli replied. "But even if they do, we are not alone. Humans have shown courage. That courage is stronger than fear. That courage is stronger than fleets or threats. We survive not only by strength but by connection." That night, humans and R. Kelly gathered to discuss strategy, not for war but for protection and communication. They reviewed the Alliance's messages carefully, noting the language of threats and intimidation. Every word was analyzed, every intention weighed. The R. Kelly shared their knowledge of the Alliance's tactics, past behaviors, and likely patterns. Humans contributed technology, insight, and creativity. Together they formed a plan that was simple in principle. Defend life without becoming aggressors. Show that mercy and courage were choices stronger than fear. The first contact attempt came as a warning. A small delegation from the Alliance appeared in orbit, just beyond the edge of Earth's atmosphere. They sent a formal demand, cold and precise, instructing the Arkeli to surrender. The council met immediately. The world held its breath as the decision was made. Earth would not comply. They would communicate, negotiate, and protect, but they would not hand over life to threats. The Arkeli watched in awe. For decades they had been rejected, turned away, abandoned, and yet here, a species that had survived famine, disaster, and conflict chose to stand with them. It was unlike anything they had ever experienced. Humans had not promised safety lightly. They had acted with courage. And in that courage, the Arkeli found something stronger than hope: trust. Days turned into tense negotiations. Messages flew back and forth, each side testing limits, each side trying to assert control. The Alliance expected fear to dictate human choices. Instead, humans remained firm, measured, and clear. They emphasized life, compassion, and the principle that survival was not something to be bargained away. The Alliance's tone grew frustrated, but human resolve did not waver. During this time, humans and R. Kelly continued to live side by side. They strengthened the settlement, trained for emergencies, and shared knowledge that would benefit both species. Even as the threat loomed, life continued. Children played, artists created, scientists experimented, and communities formed bonds that could not easily be broken. Fear existed, but it was tempered by courage, hope, and shared purpose. One night, under the soft glow of Earth's moon, the Arkeli leader gathered a group of humans and their own people. They spoke quietly, words that carried the weight of centuries of survival. "We have been hunted, rejected, and nearly erased," they said. "But here you chose courage. Here life has a chance to thrive. Remember that courage does not end in action. It continues in every choice, every gesture, every moment we protect each other." Humans listened in silence, feeling the truth in the words. They had acted with compassion before the moment demanded it, not out of obligation but out of choice. And now their choice had meaning far beyond Earth. It was a statement to the galaxy. Life, no matter where it comes from, deserves respect, protection, and hope. The Interstellar Alliance tried again, this time signaling a larger fleet near the edge of the solar system. The tension was palpable. Earth's defense networks were ready, though the humans hoped never to use them. The Arkeli worked closely with human engineers, offering guidance, insight, and calm determination. Together they prepared not for war, but for the defense of life, proving that courage and cooperation could stand against threats far larger than either species alone. As the fleet approached, humans and R. Kelly stood together. The children of both species watched. The adults worked tirelessly and the leaders spoke calmly, projecting strength without aggression. The Alliance expected fear. Instead, they found unity. They expected submission. Instead, they found courage. And in that courage, a message was sent. Not in words alone, but in action. Earth would protect life, and it would do so without surrendering its principles. The fleet eventually retreated. They realized that threats would not bend a species that had chosen compassion and courage. Earth had shown that life was more than resources, more than politics, more than fear. It was about connection, empathy, and the willingness to stand with those in need. The Arkeli breathed a sigh of relief, understanding that their survival was no longer a fragile hope, but a living reality made possible by humans who chose to act when it mattered most. In the weeks after the fleet's retreat, life returned to the settlement, but nothing would ever feel the same. Humans and Arkeli had faced the possibility of loss together and had stood firm. Trust had deepened, bonds had strengthened, and both species had learned that courage and mercy were not weaknesses but strengths. Children played freely, scientists continued their work, and the community thrived under a new sense of purpose. The Arkeli leader often stood quietly, watching the sun rise over fields where human and alien children laughed together. They reflected on the journey that had brought them here, from rejection, fear, and despair to courage, connection, and survival. For the first time in generations, they felt not just safe but valued, not just seen but respected, and they knew that the story of their survival was not theirs alone. It was a story of humanity, courage, and the choice to act with heart. And so, as the stars shone above Earth, humans and Arkeli alike knew that the bonds they had forged would endure. They had faced threats from the void, challenges from fear, and tests of morality, and they had chosen life, hope, and courage. Together they had proven that even in a galaxy of rejection, there was a place where compassion could thrive. The days after the threat from the Interstellar Alliance were filled with both relief and determination. Earth had stood firm and the Arkeli were finally safe for now. But safety did not mean life returned to normal. Humans and Arkeli both understood that survival was not a moment, but a process. Every day required attention, patience, and effort. They had learned that the galaxy was not always kind, but together they could create a space of hope, trust, and life. In the settlement, routines had taken hold. Children woke early, running through the fields, laughing in a language that mixed human words with the Arkeli tongue. Adults shared work, knowledge, and stories, sometimes sitting together under the stars to watch the sky. There was music, art, science, and community, and slowly, life began to feel more than just survival. It began to feel like living. The Arkeli leader walked among the people each day, observing, learning, and quietly guiding when needed. They noticed the small gestures that spoke volumes. A human helping an Arkeli with a tool, a child sharing a game, a teacher explaining Earth history to curious alien students. It was these moments that defined life now. Not power, not conflict, but connection. One afternoon, a group of humans and Arkeli gathered to build a new garden. The Arkeli shared knowledge of plants that could grow quickly and survive harsh conditions, while humans showed techniques to enrich soil and conserve water. Together, they worked side by side, hands in dirt, laughing at mistakes, celebrating successes. A human child tripped over a root, falling flat on the ground, and an Arkeli child immediately offered a hand to help them up. The adults smiled quietly, knowing that these small bonds would carry into the future. Even as life grew peaceful, questions of identity and belonging emerged. The Arkeli had been outsiders for generations. Humans had welcomed them, but could they truly feel at home? And for humans, living alongside a species so different yet so resilient brought both wonder and responsibility. They had chosen compassion, but now they had to live with it fully, sharing space, resources, and culture while learning patience and understanding. One evening, a human teacher and an Arkeli elder sat together watching the sunset. "Do you think we'll ever feel like we truly belong here?" the teacher asked. The elder smiled softly, their eyes reflecting the fading light. "Belonging is not given. It is created. We build it in our choices, in our actions, in how we treat each other. You have chosen kindness, courage, and empathy. In that we belong." Across the settlement, other humans and Arkeli were discovering the same truth. They planted gardens, repaired shelters, and shared meals. They created songs and stories that blended their histories. Children invented games that mixed human sports with Arkeli rituals. Life was not perfect, but it was alive. It was growing. And every day that growth reminded them of the courage it had taken to survive and the hope it had created. The council continued to work, not as rulers, but as caretakers of a fragile peace. They created systems to ensure fairness, safety, and collaboration. Decisions were made together, not imposed. And slowly, humans began to see the Arkeli not as guests, but as neighbors, friends, and community members. Trust deepened with each passing day, and the fear that had once hovered at the edges of society faded into cautious acceptance. One morning, the Arkeli leader called a meeting with a small group of humans. They spoke quietly but with authority. The galaxy will not always remain silent. Other worlds will watch as the Alliance has watched. We must be ready not for war but for the courage to protect life. We have survived rejection and fear. We have learned that hope and trust are our greatest strengths, and now we must ensure that these lessons endure. Humans nodded, understanding that the challenge was not over. Peace required vigilance and hope required action. They began to train together, not for conflict but for readiness, emergency response, communication, and problem-solving. The goal was simple: protect life, maintain trust, and continue building a community where both species could thrive. In the following weeks, the Arkeli introduced new technologies that made life safer and easier. Water systems were improved, energy was more efficient, and communication networks allowed rapid coordination across the settlement. Humans contributed their expertise in agriculture, medicine, and construction. Together, they created a system where knowledge and effort flowed both ways, strengthening everyone involved. Even as they built, humans and Arkeli continued to learn about each other. Storytelling sessions became a nightly ritual, with humans sharing tales of Earth's history, and the Arkeli recounting the beauty and tragedy of their lost homeworld. Art projects combined colors, textures, and sounds from both cultures. Music blended instruments and voices, creating melodies that celebrated survival, resilience, and the bonds between two species. Children became the heart of the community. They were fearless in their curiosity, eager to explore differences and willing to form friendships without hesitation. A human child taught an Arkeli child how to climb trees, while the Arkeli child showed a human child how to use a small device that produced light and sound in unique patterns. Their laughter echoed across fields and halls, a reminder that hope was alive and growing stronger every day. As months passed, the settlement became a model of what could happen when life was chosen over fear. Humans and Arkeli lived together, worked together, and celebrated together. They held festivals blending cultures, marking milestones and creating new traditions that belonged to neither species alone, but to both. It was a living testament to courage, compassion, and resilience. One day, the Arkeli leader called the entire community together. They spoke to both humans and Arkeli, their voice carrying both pride and humility. "We have come far," they said. "We have survived what others thought impossible. We have built trust where there was fear, and we have learned that life is not only worth protecting, but worth celebrating. We are not just survivors. We are a community, and in that we are strong." Tears and smiles rippled through the crowd. Humans felt pride, not only in themselves but in what they had created with the Arkeli. The Arkeli felt gratitude, not only for survival but for belonging, for connection, for being seen and valued. Children laughed in the background. Unconcerned with history, politics, or danger, they simply played, representing the hope and promise of a future built together. The years that followed were filled with growth, learning, and continued vigilance. Humans and Arkeli became more than neighbors. They became a unified community. They built schools, libraries, and centers of culture and science. They shared knowledge not only for survival but for exploration, for understanding, for the joy of discovery. They celebrated life in every form, remembering the past but never letting it define their future. And through it all, the lessons remained clear. Life was fragile, but courage could protect it. Fear was natural, but empathy and trust could overcome it. Rejection had been endured, but acceptance had created a future worth living. The Arkeli had learned that even after despair, life could thrive. Humans had learned that compassion was not weakness, but a strength that could change the course of history. On the night of the first anniversary of the Arkeli landing, both species gathered to watch the stars. Children lay on blankets, pointing at constellations, while adults shared quiet conversations about the journey they had shared. The Arkeli leader stood at the edge of the gathering, observing the scene, feeling the weight of history and the lightness of hope. "We have endured," they whispered to a human beside them, "and we have thrived. Not alone, but together." The human smiled softly. "Together," they repeated. And in that word, the future felt limitless. As the night deepened, humans and Arkeli alike gazed at the stars. The past was remembered, the worlds that had rejected them, the dangers they had faced, but so was the present. Life had been chosen, Courage had been exercised and trust had been built. Together, they had created a home that was not perfect, but alive, vibrant, and full of possibility. And in that shared silence, filled with the soft sounds of laughter, whispers, and the hum of life, both species understood the truth. Survival was not the end. It was the beginning, a beginning built on compassion, courage, and the unwavering choice to see life, to protect it, and to celebrate it. The Arkeli were no longer refugees, and humans were no longer bystanders. Together, they had created a story worth telling, a story of hope, of unity, and of the enduring power of empathy. The galaxy had tested them, threatened them, and watched them, but Earth had chosen to stand with life. And in that choice, both humans and Arkeli had discovered a truth more profound than survival itself. That life, when shared, when valued, and when protected, could become extraordinary. And so, as the stars shone brightly overhead, the settlement slept peacefully. The children dreamed, the adults planned, and the leaders reflected on the journey that had brought them here. Every challenge had been met, every fear had been faced, and every act of courage had been rewarded. The Arkeli had found home. Humanity had found purpose, and together, they had proven that even in a galaxy of rejection, hope could endure, grow, and shine brighter than the stars themselves.